They're here for you. CEO Rowan Beaumont turned from his conversation with the hospital administrator. His gaze fell on the janitor, a man he'd barely registered moments before, who now stood with a stillness that was deeply unsettling. The mop he held seemed less like a tool and more like a sentry's staff. "I'm sorry," Rowan said, his voice clipped with the ingrained annoyance of a man whose every minute was meticulously scheduled and valued. His lead security guard, a broad-shouldered man named Graves, stepped forward, placing himself between Rowan and the janitor. "Sir, I'll handle this," he addressed Keene with a dismissive air. "This is a private conversation. Go back to your work." The janitor, Keene O'Connell, didn't even glance at the guard. His intense gray eyes remained locked on Rowan. The man at the end of the hall, the one on his phone. His stance is Spetsnaz. His jacket is tailored to hide a weapon, not for fashion. The woman by the nurse's station isn't a doctor. She's wearing tactical assault boots. I saw two more setting up on the floor below. They're boxing you in. Each word was delivered in a low, even tone that cut through the sterile hum of the hallway. Rowan's other guard, Harris, shifted his weight, his hand hovering near the inside of his jacket. The hospital administrator, Dr. Albright, began to sputter a protest. "This is the most secure medical facility on the eastern seaboard. This is an outrage." His words were swallowed by a sound that silenced them all. A deep, mechanical thump from the building's core, followed by a series of rapid, concussive slams. Shutters of reinforced steel dropped over every window with the finality of a guillotine. The bright afternoon sunlight vanished, plunging the fifth-floor Beaumont wing into the cool, artificial glow of internal lighting. A collective gasp went through the nurses and staff. Phones were instantly useless. No signal, no Wi-Fi. They were in a cage. In the sudden tomb-like silence, Rowan stared at the janitor, whose impossible warning had just been terrifyingly validated. The weary resignation in the man's eyes was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus that seemed to be the only calm thing in the rising sea of panic. Just 2 minutes earlier, Keene's world had been small and simple. Each swipe of his mop was a second closer to the end of his shift, a second closer to sitting beside his daughter, Lily, in room 512. Her fragile health was the reason he'd taken this anonymous job, burying a life he never spoke of. He'd been coming out of a supply closet when he saw a man delivering linens. It wasn't just the man's quiet, predatory walk. It was the tattoo peeking from his collar, a stylized scorpion with a dagger for a tail. The symbol had hit Keene like a physical blow. He knew it. It was the mark of a freelance wet work team, specialists in high-value elimination, men without conscience or country, and there was only one target on this floor worth their time: Rowan Beaumont. His warning hadn't been a guess. It was a certainty born from a life he prayed he'd left behind. Now, Graves had his weapon drawn. "Mr. Beaumont, get behind me." Harris did the same, forming a tight, professional perimeter. A voice, amplified and unnaturally calm, echoed from the PA system, a voice that made a cold dread bloom in Keene's chest. "Good afternoon, staff and guests of the Beaumont wing. This facility is now under our control. For your own safety, you will follow all instructions without question. We have only one objective here today." It was Jarek. The familiar cadence, the smooth confidence. It was a ghost from his past, speaking from the walls. Rowan's face was pale, but his composure held. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded of the ceiling. A soft chuckle came through the speakers. "Mr. Beaumont, I'm glad you're here. As for what we want, it's simple. We want you. And we want your daughter." The air went out of Rowan's lungs. "Ilara?" he whispered, his voice cracking. His daughter and his wife, Celeste, were in the children's solarium on this very floor, a room made almost entirely of glass. "That's right," Jarek's voice purred. "This is about a debt your father owes, a matter of family. So let's not make this difficult. Send out the girl, then yourself. Do that, and maybe the rest of you live." It was a lie. Keene knew Jarek's playbook. He never left witnesses. Rowan looked around wildly, his authority stripped away, leaving only the raw terror of a father. "My daughter, the solarium, down that hall. My wife is with her." Before he could finish, two men in orderly uniforms appeared at the far end of the corridor. They advanced with a synchronized deadliness, raising pistols fitted with suppressors. "Get down!" Keene yelled, his voice a raw command that cut through the rising panic. He didn't wait. In one explosive motion, he shoved the heavy janitor's cart forward with all his strength. It shot across the polished floor, slamming into the legs of the first gunman just as he fired. The shot went wide with a soft aperti. The second gunman adjusted his aim, targeting Rowan. But Keene was already moving, spinning his mop like a staff. The heavy, wet end whipped around, connecting with the gunman's wrist with a sickening crack. The pistol clattered to the floor. Graves and Harris opened fire, their shots loud and concussive in the enclosed space. The first gunman, tangled in the cart, went down. The second, his wrist broken, was already pulling another weapon with his good hand. He was fast, but Keene was faster. He closed the distance in 2 steps, driving the splintered end of the mop handle directly into the man's throat. The gunman made a choked, gargling sound and collapsed, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the janitor who had killed him. The fight had lasted less than 5 seconds. Keene stood over the 2 fallen men, breathing heavily. Rowan and his guards stared, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. Keene ignored their stunned expressions, his eyes already scanning the hallway, cataloging angles, exits, and threats. The part of his mind he had suppressed for 9 long years was now fully in control. "They'll send more," he said, his voice hard as iron. "They know where you are. The solarium is a glass box. It's a death trap. We have to move your family." Now Rowan finally found his voice, the question tearing out of him. Who are you?" Keene turned, his gray eyes seeming to burn with a cold fire. "Right now, I'm the only one who can get you out of this." He glanced down the long, silent corridor, toward the room where his own daughter lay, vulnerable and alone. "And you're the only one who can help me." Rowan's mind reeled. The question of who Keene was felt monumental and meaningless all at once. His daughter's name, spoken by that monstrous voice over the speakers, was a physical blow that had eclipsed everything else. He looked at the 2 bodies on the floor, the discarded mop, and the janitor who stood before him, transformed. "Help you how?" Rowan's voice was raspy, the sound of a man whose world had been stripped down to its most primal components. "You're the target," Keene said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Jarek will focus all his resources on finding you. That means I need to keep you moving, and I need to keep you alive. In return, I need access." He gestured to the keycard clipped to Rowan's suit jacket. "That's a master for this wing, isn't it?" Rowan nodded numbly. "It should be. Jarek may have overridden the main system, but he might not have locked out the secondary panels, service elevators, maintenance corridors, supply closets." It's a chance. Keene's eyes flickered down the hall in the direction of the pediatric rooms, of room 512. "The further I can get you from that part of the hospital, the safer my daughter will be. Jarek won't risk a firefight where there are too many civilian casualties he can't control. Not yet." The raw honesty of the statement cut through Rowan's shock. This wasn't an act of heroism for his sake. It was a transaction, a desperate bargain between 2 fathers, brokered in a hallway littered with the dead. "Okay," Rowan said, making the decision. He unclipped his keycard and held it out. He then turned to his guards. "You heard him. We're with him." Graves hesitated, his eyes narrowed with a professional's deep-seated suspicion. "Sir, with all due respect, we don't know who this man is. My training, my entire job, is to protect you. That means following protocols, not taking orders from a janitor who just got lucky with a mop. "Did that look like luck to you, Graves?" Rowan snapped, a flash of his usual authority returning. His gaze was hard. "Your protocols got us trapped in a hallway with 2 dead men at our feet. His actions are the only reason we are still alive. Your job is to keep me and my family alive. Right now, he's the only one with a plan that's working. So you will follow his lead, or you will be of no use to me. Is that understood?" The guard's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt, reluctant nod. "Understood, sir." Keene took the keycard, ignoring the guard's hostile glare. He pointed at the fallen gunmen. "Graves, Harris, get their weapons, check the ammunition, we're exposed here." The guards, now with a direct tactical order, moved with purpose. The simple act of following a command seemed to steady them. They quickly stripped the bodies of 2 suppressed pistols and several magazines, the tools of their trade a grim comfort in their hands. Keene turned his attention to a small, unmarked door to their left, nestled between a water fountain and a potted plant. The solarium is 200 feet down the main artery. No cover, they'll be watching it. This is a linen chute access closet. It connects to a service corridor that runs parallel to this one. It'll be dark and tight, but it should get us most of the way there without being seen. "How do you know that?" Harris asked, stuffing a magazine into his pocket as he handed a pistol to Keene. "Because for the last 6 months part of my job has been to clean it," Keene said flatly. He strode to the door and swiped Rowan's keycard. A small green light blinked, and the lock clicked open. "Let's go. Harris, you take point. Graves, you have our 6. Mr. Beaumont, stay between them. Move fast, move quiet." The service corridor was as promised, narrow, dark, and smelling of bleach and stale air. A single line of emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows. The only sounds were their hurried footsteps on the dusty concrete and the distant, unsettling hum of the hospital's emergency power. They moved in silence, a strange procession of a billionaire, his 2 high-priced bodyguards, and the janitor, who was now their reluctant commander. Rowan's mind raced. He thought of Celeste and Alara, picturing them in the bright, cheerful solarium, now a fishbowl waiting for a stone to be thrown. Fear, cold and absolute, threatened to paralyze him. "You know him," Rowan stated, his voice low in the darkness. It wasn't a question. Keene didn't break stride. "We served in the same unit, a long time ago, in a place very different from this." His voice was tight, clipped. He wasn't the one in charge then, but he was always the one who enjoyed the work too much. Before Rowan could ask more, Keene held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. He pressed his ear against the thin metal wall that separated them from the main corridor. Faintly, through the insulation, they could hear it. The soft tread of multiple pairs of boots on linoleum. The soft click of gear. "They're sweeping the hallway," Keene whispered, his body tense. "Coming from the direction we just left. They're faster than I thought." He moved forward again, picking up the pace. "Next access panel is 50 feet ahead. It opens up across from the solarium." A minute later, they reached another service door. Keene peered through a small, grimy viewport. Across the main hall, maybe 30 feet away, were the double-glass doors of the children's solarium. The bright cartoon animals painted on the glass seemed like a cruel joke in the flashing emergency lights. He could see Celeste huddled in a corner with Alara and a few other parents. There was no sign of Jarek's men. Yet. Graves took the radio from one of the dead men, fiddling with the channels. "Maybe we can hear their chatter," he muttered. He put the earpiece in, his face grim. He listened for a moment, then his eyes widened in horror. He looked at Keene. Jarek's voice suddenly filled the small earpiece, cold and amused. "Did you really think I wouldn't know you were here, Keene? Scuttling through the walls like a rat." "You always did prefer the shadows," Keene froze, his body going rigid. "It's a shame," Jarek's voice continued, slick as oil. "You have a daughter of your own now, I hear. A patient here. Lily, is it? Room 512. It would be a tragedy if the stress of all this commotion were to affect her condition. A terrible, tragic accident. The threat was no longer implied. It was a knife, held directly to the throat of the one thing in the world Keene cared about. The bargain he had made in his head, Rowan's safety for Lily's, had just been voided. Jarek was changing the rules. He was raising the stakes to an unbearable level. And Keene knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they had to move. Now, the threat was a poisoned dart, fired from the ether directly into Keene's soul. For a split second, the world went silent, the hum of the hospital and the frantic beating of his own heart fading away. All he could see was Lily's face, small and pale in her hospital bed. All he could feel was a white-hot, volcanic rage that threatened to consume him. Jarek hadn't just threatened his daughter. He had used her name, turning it into a weapon. The tactician, the ghost who preferred the shadows, was gone. The father remained. "He's watching us," Keene growled, his voice a low, dangerous thing. "He's playing with us. Time for stealth is over." He looked at Graves and Harris, his gray eyes burning with an intensity that made both trained professionals take an involuntary step back. "We're going in, hard and fast. We pull the family out, and we find a corner of this place to fortify. Harris, you're on point. Graves, with me. We move on 3. He didn't wait for a response. 1. He took a deep breath. 2. He braced himself against the service door. Rowan, watching from the back, saw the raw fury in Keene. "Wait! What's the— 3! Keene shoved the door open and burst out into the main corridor, pistol raised. Harris and Graves were right behind him, their training overriding their hesitation. They moved in a tight, 3-man formation, sprinting across the 30 feet of open polished floor. Each step felt like a mile, an eternity spent in the crosshairs of an unseen rifle. They reached the glass doors of the solarium, Harris going left, Graves right, Keene providing cover from the center. Through the glass, Keene saw Celeste. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror as 3 armed men appeared at the door. Then she saw Keene, and her expression shifted to one of desperate, pleading hope. She immediately began gathering Alara and the other 2 mothers with their children, herding them away from the entrance. "Rowan, now!" Keene yelled into the corridor behind him. Rowan ran from the service door, his heart pounding, pressing himself flat against the wall beside the solarium entrance. Keene gave a sharp nod to Graves, who pulled the door open. "Everybody out! Move, now!" Keene commanded the families inside. The terrified civilians began to scramble out, their movements clumsy with fear. But as the first mother and her child cleared the doorway, the hallway erupted in gunfire. 2 of Jarek's men appeared from a side corridor to the east, their suppressed pistols spitting fire. "Contact!" Harris yelled, returning fire from his covered position. Keene and Graves ducked back, using the thick doorframe as cover while firing back, trying to give Rowan time to pull the families to safety. Bullets sparked off the metal frame, one shattering a section of the cartoon-painted glass. Inside the solarium, a child screamed. They were pinned down, but it was worse than that. With a deafening clang that echoed over the gunfire, a heavy fire door slammed shut at the east end of the hallway, cutting off the attackers' retreat and their own. A second later, another shutter crashed down at the west end, where they had come from. They were trapped. 100-foot-long kill box, with the glass-walled solarium on one side and Jarek's men on the other. Jarek's voice, now triumphant, boomed over the main PA system. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Keene. I told you this could be messy. Now, let's see you swim." A soft hissing sound started, emanating from the ceiling panels above them. A fine, white mist, almost invisible in the flashing emergency lights, began to pour into the sealed corridor. "What is that?" Celeste cried, coughing as she pulled Alara close. Harris, who had served as a combat medic, recognized the faintly sweet smell instantly. Anesthetic gas! He's trying to put us to sleep. He's flushing us out. The situation had become impossible. They couldn't stay in the corridor. The gas would incapacitate them in minutes, leaving them helpless. They couldn't retreat into the solarium. It was a glass cage offering no protection from the bullets. The two gunmen, likely equipped with filters, pressed their advantage, advancing from behind a decorative bench, their shots becoming more accurate. Keene fired his last bullet, the slide on his pistol locking back. He was defenseless. He looked around wildly, his mind racing. They were trapped, outgunned, and running out of time. He looked at the chaos inside the solarium, at the terrified children, at Rowan shielding his family. He looked at the gas pouring from the ceiling. He looked at the massive reinforced window on the far side of the solarium, a wall of glass that looked out over the city. It wasn't a wall, it was a door. "In here!" Keene roared, shoving everyone back inside the solarium. "Get against the far wall!" He ran inside, his eyes scanning for a tool, a weapon, anything. He saw a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. He ripped it from its housing. "What are you doing?" Rowan yelled over the rising panic. "Jarek wants us alive," Keene shouted, hefting the heavy metal canister. "That means he has to come in and get us. I'm not waiting for him." He turned to face the massive pane of glass that separated them from the fifth-floor terrace outside. It was their only way out. An escape route into the open air, 5 stories above the ground. "Get back!" he roared. He swung the fire extinguisher like a battering ram, putting all his strength, all his rage, all his desperation into the blow. The canister slammed into the center of the window. The tempered glass shuddered, a spiderweb of cracks instantly radiating from the point of impact, but it held. He swung again, a guttural yell torn from his throat. The cracks deepened, the entire pane groaning in protest. One of the gunmen in the hall, seeing what he was doing, stepped out from cover to get a clear shot. Before he could fire, Keene swung a third time. The window didn't shatter. It exploded, blowing outwards in a massive, crystalline cascade that sounded like a waterfall of diamonds. For a single, surreal moment, the roar of the city, the cold evening wind, and the freedom of the open sky rushed into their prison. The cold night air rushed into the solarium, a shocking, welcome slap to the face that cut through the cloying sweetness of the anesthetic gas. For a moment, everyone stared at the gaping hole Keene had created, a portal to the outside world, suspended 5 stories above the glittering city streets. "Go!" Keene's command was a guttural roar that broke the spell. "Get out now! Move!" He began herding the terrified families toward the broken window. Rowan went first, turning to help Celeste, and a terrified Ilara climb over the jagged sill. The other 2 mothers followed, shielding their children's heads from the shards of glass still clinging to the frame. The gunmen in the corridor, recovering from the shock, renewed their assault. Bullets zipped through the solarium, punching neat holes in the glass wall behind them and shattering decorative pots. "Graves, Harris, cover them!" Keene yelled. The 2 guards, positioned on either side of the solarium door, laid down a volley of suppressing fire, their shots deafening in the enclosed space. Their disciplined firing forced the 2 mercenaries to duck back behind their flimsy cover. "We can't hold them for long!" Graves shouted, reloading his pistol with practiced speed. The last of the civilians scrambled out onto the terrace. Harris began to back out after them, turning to fire a final, parting shot into the gas-filled corridor. As he cleared the window, a bullet from one of the gunmen caught him in the thigh. He cried out, a sharp intake of breath, and his leg buckled, sending him tumbling onto the stone terrace. "Man down!" Graves yelled, laying down a final spray of fire to keep the gunman pinned. Keene was already moving. He grabbed the front of Harris's tactical vest and hauled him backward, dragging the injured guard away from the window as Graves jumped out after them. For a moment, they were safe, crouched behind a large decorative stone planter, the sound of gunfire from inside now slightly muffled. They were on a wide, wind-swept terrace. The air was cold and sharp. Wrought iron benches and other heavy planters dotted the space. which wrapped around the corner of the building. Below, the city was a tapestry of twinkling lights, utterly oblivious to the war being waged above it. "Harris, how bad is it?" Graves knelt beside his partner, who was groaning, his face pale in the flashing emergency lights. Keene was already there, his hands moving with a purpose and knowledge that had nothing to do with janitorial work. "It's a through and through," he said, his voice calm and authoritative after a quick, practiced look at the wound. The bullet had entered the front of the thigh and exited the back. "Missed the femoral artery, you're lucky. But you're losing blood. We need to stop it now." Rowan watched in stunned silence as the janitor took command of the medical emergency. He tore a long strip of fabric from the shirt of a fallen orderly he dragged partway out with him during the escape. He expertly folded it into a thick compress and pressed it hard against the entry wound. "Hold that," he commanded Harris, who gritted his teeth and complied. "Graves, your belt." Now Graves unbuckled his belt and handed it over. Keene swiftly looped it high on Harris's thigh, using a piece of metal from the broken window frame as a windlass to twist it tight into a makeshift tourniquet. The bleeding slowed almost immediately. "That will hold," Keene said, his eyes already scanning their new prison. The terrace was about 100 feet long, ending in sheer glass walls. There was no way down. Rowan finally went to his family, dropping to his knees and pulling Celeste and Alara into a fierce embrace. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "We're fine," Celeste whispered, her voice trembling. "Rowan, who is that man?" Rowan looked over at Keene, who was now staring back into the solarium, a silhouette of grim determination. "I don't know," he admitted, "but he's the reason we're still alive." Keene's mind was a maelstrom. The escape was a temporary reprieve, a tactical retreat to a new, more exposed position. Jarek's threat against Lily was still the primary mission parameter, a screaming alarm in his head that was louder than any fire bell. He had to end this, fast. The crackle of the radio in Graves's earpiece made them all flinch. Jarek's voice, now stripped of all amusement and filled with a cold, simmering fury, slithered into their sanctuary. "Well played, Keene." A bit dramatic with the window, but effective. "I'll admit, I'm impressed." The janitor routine almost had me fooled. Keene remained silent, his jaw tight. "But now you're trapped," Jarek continued. "A nice little shooting gallery out on that ledge, and your friend Harris is bleeding. Time is not on your side. And while you're out there enjoying the evening air, my other team is getting a little bored. So I've given them a new task." Keene knew what was coming. He felt the blood drain from his face. "I'm sending them to the pediatric ward to check on your daughter, Lily. I want them to make sure she's comfortable. Unless, of course, you'd rather they didn't." Rowan saw the look on Keene's face. The man who had been an unstoppable force of controlled violence suddenly looked broken, his composure shattering like the solarium glass. He was a father, staring into an impossible choice. "You have 60 seconds to surrender, Keene," Jarek's voice declared, cold as the grave. "Throw out your weapons and walk back into the solarium with your hands on your head. You do that and I'll call them off. You don't, and my men go into room 512. I can't be responsible for what might happen to such a fragile little girl. Your choice." The clock is ticking. The world narrowed to the frantic ticking of a 60-second clock in Keene's head. Jarek's voice was a triumphant dagger in his ear, twisting in the wound of his deepest fear. "Fragile little girl, your choice." He saw Lily's face, her trusting smile, the easy love she gave him without question. The thought of Jarek's men, those soulless predators, stepping into her room. It was a violation so profound it threatened to tear him apart. Surrender meant walking back into that hallway and handing Jarek the Beaumonts, trusting a man with no honor to keep his word. It was a fool's hope, but defying him meant signing his daughter's death warrant. 50 seconds, Keene. His resolve crumbled. The warrior, the strategist, the ghost, they were all consumed by the terrified father. He took a staggering step toward the broken window, his hand starting to rise in surrender. "Don't!" The word was quiet, but firm. Rowan had stepped forward, his face pale, but his eyes blazing with a defiant fire. "Don't do it, Keen. He's lying. You know he is. The second you surrender, he kills us. Then he goes after your daughter anyway, just to prove he can. There is no bargain to be made with a man like that." Keen stared at him, his mind a maelstrom of indecision. "He's presenting you with two bad options," Rowan continued, his voice gaining strength. "That's what men like him do. They make you believe the cage is smaller than it is. There has to be a third option. We just have to find it. We fight. For both our daughters." Together, 40 seconds. The word together struck a chord deep inside Keen. It was a lifeline in a sea of despair. Rowan was right. Jarek was counting on his fear, counting on him to think like a father and not a soldier. His eyes, which had been fixed on the horrifying choice before him, began to race around the terrace, scanning every stone, every joint, every shadow. He wasn't just looking for an escape route anymore. He was looking for a weapon. He was looking for a way to change the board. 30 seconds. And then he saw it. A detail so small, so insignificant, it was practically invisible. A square metal panel near the base of the wall at the far end of the terrace, partially hidden behind a decorative shrub. It was flush with the stonework, its seams filled with grime. Most people would never see it. But Keen had spent 6 months cleaning this wing, his eyes trained to notice every imperfection. He knew what it was. An external access hatch for the main HVAC control unit. A way into the building's lungs. The plan hit him like a lightning strike. Desperate, insane, but it was a chance. It was the third option. "The radio!" Keen snapped, his voice suddenly alive with frantic energy. "Give it to me." Graves handed it over. Keen keyed the mic, his voice shaking, but not with fear, with performance. "All right, Jarek. You win. I'm coming out. Don't hurt her, please." 20 seconds. Jarek's voice was slick with triumph. "Wise choice. Throw out your weapons. Walk back into the hallway with your hands on your head." Keen didn't look back. "Rowan," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper that only he could hear. "Your keycard. I need it. Now." Rowan slid it into his hand without a word. "Graves," Keen commanded, his voice still low. "When I give the signal, you empty your magazine into that side room where they're hiding. Don't aim to kill, just to make them deaf. Create a wall of noise. Understood?" Graves gave a grim, determined nod. 10 seconds. "I'm coming now," Keen shouted into the radio. He started walking toward the broken window, his hands half raised in a gesture of surrender. "Just give me a minute to get these people to stand down." "You're out of time," Jarek snarled. "My men are at the door of 512. This was it. Keen reached the broken window and turned, facing the small, terrified group on the terrace. He looked past them, toward the far end, measuring the distance. He had one chance. He took a deep breath and roared into the radio, a cry of fake despair. "Damn you, Jarek! My name is Keen O'Connell. You remember that name?" As he yelled his own name, the signal. Graves opened fire. The roar of the pistol was deafening. He fired round after round into the side room where the gunman had been, the bullets sparking off the metal door frame, forcing them to take cover from the ricochets and the sheer volume of noise. The distraction was all Keen needed. He wasn't moving toward the window. He was sprinting in the opposite direction, toward the hidden hatch. The gunmen, their attention on Graves, didn't even see him go. He slid the last 10 feet on the stone ground, slamming up against the wall. He jammed Rowan's keycard into a nearly invisible slot beside the panel. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a soft click. The magnetic lock released. He dug his fingers into the seam and pulled. The heavy panel opened with a groan of protest, revealing a black, cavernous space, humming with the sound of powerful fans. Jarek's voice, now screaming with rage, came over the radio. It's a trick! Get him! Get him now! Team 2, go! Breach the room! Breach it now! Keen threw the keycard back to Rowan. Barricade the window! Use the planters, the benches, anything. Hold them off as long as you can. He gave one last look at the terrified faces of the people he was leaving behind. He saw Alara, clinging to her father, and he saw Lily, waiting for him, alone. Without another word, Keen O'Connell slipped into the darkness of the vent shaft, pulling the heavy panel closed behind him. He was alone, unarmed, in the guts of the machine, with the sound of his enemy's fury in his ears and the fate of his daughter resting on his next move. The clock hadn't stopped. It had just started over. The heavy metal panel sealed Keen in absolute darkness. The sounds of the outside world, the gunfire, the wind, were instantly swallowed by a deafening, monotonous roar. It was the sound of 1,000,000 cubic feet of air being forced through the hospital's metal veins, a hurricane trapped in a box. The air was cold, thick with the smell of dust and ozone. Keen was on his hands and knees in a main trunk line, a space perhaps 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. Jarek's last words burned through the sensory chaos. Team 2, go! Breach the room! Breach it now! There was no time for fear. Keen began to crawl, moving by feel, his hands scraping against the rough metal floor. He was a ghost inside the machine, his only guide a mental map of the hospital he'd pieced together over months of cleaning its public spaces. He knew the pediatric ward was in the north section of the wing. He had to move toward the primary air handling unit and find the smaller duct that branched off to feed that corridor. It was a journey of maybe 300 feet, an eternity. Every scrape of his knee, every rasp of his own breathing was lost in the thunder of the fans. He pushed forward, a prayer and a curse on his lips. Lily? Hang on, Daddy's coming. Back on the terrace, the world was anything but silent. Rowan heaved a heavy ceramic planter, grunting with the effort as he and Graves shoved it against the broken frame of the solarium window, creating the base of a barricade. It's not enough, Graves said, his voice strained as bullets from the corridors sparked against their new cover. They'll push through that in seconds. Then we make it taller, Celeste shouted, her fear channeled into furious energy. She directed the other 2 mothers, who were numb with shock, to help. Grab those benches! Tip them on their sides, now! The small group worked with frantic purpose, dragging heavy wrought iron benches and other planters to reinforce their position. Harris, propped against the wall with his leg elevated, reloaded a pistol and handed it to Rowan. Aim for the door frame, the injured guard instructed, his voice tight with pain. Don't try to be a hero. Just make them keep their heads down. Buy him time. Rowan took the weapon. It felt alien and heavy in his hand. He was a deal-maker, a negotiator. But he thought of Alara, huddled behind him. He thought of the janitor, crawling through the darkness to save his own daughter. He rested the pistol on the barricade, aimed, and fired. The recoil slammed his shoulder, but he fired again. He was no longer a CEO. He was a father, holding the line. Keen felt the main duct begin to slope downward. He slid, scrambling to control his descent, and landed hard in a large junction chamber. The noise here was even louder. To his right, he could just make out the colossal spinning silhouette of a primary circulation fan, its blades churning the air with relentless force. A wrong move in this darkness could get him shredded. He pressed himself against the far wall, away from the fan, and felt for the smaller ducts branching off. His fingers brushed against 3 openings. Which one? His mind raced. He fumbled for the small keychain flashlight he always carried, the one Lily had given him, a cheap plastic thing shaped like a ladybug. He clicked it on. The beam was pathetic, a tiny spear of light in the overwhelming darkness, but it was enough. He scanned the wall above the ducts. There, scrawled in faded marker, P-Wing, Pediatric. He scrambled into the smaller duct, the space far more cramped. He was forced to crawl on his stomach now, pulling himself forward with his elbows. The roar of the main fan faded, replaced by a lower hum. Here, the sounds of his own movement seemed deafeningly loud. He needed a weapon. His hands swept the floor of the duct, searching. His fingers closed around something hard and cylindrical. He brought the ladybug light to it. It was a foot-long piece of threaded steel rod, probably left behind during construction. It was heavy, solid. He gripped it tightly. It wasn't much, but it was better than his bare hands. He crawled faster, the metal rod clutched in one hand. He could feel the duct vibrating beneath him. He was close. Up ahead, he saw a faint, rectangular patch of light. A service grate. He reached it and pressed his face against the cold metal slats, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was directly above the corridor of the pediatric ward, and he was almost too late. Below him, not 15 feet away, 2 of Jarek's men stood in front of room 512. The door, painted with a cheerful cartoon giraffe, was already splintered around the lock. They weren't trying to pick it. They were using a Halligan bar, a heavy piece of steel designed for forcible entry, to pry it open. Standing between them and the door was a single, defiant figure. A young nurse, no older than 25, with her arms spread wide. "You can't go in there," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "She's a patient. She's on a ventilator. You can't." One of the men, the one not holding the bar, laughed. "That's real brave of you. Now get out of the way before you get hurt." "No," she said, planting her feet. "I won't let you." The man with the bar ignored her and slammed the tool into the door again. A long crack shot up the wood. It would only hold for another few seconds. Keen's world went red. He saw the nurse's bravery. He saw the splintering door. He saw his daughter lying helpless in her bed just on the other side. He looked at the grate. 4 screws held it in place. He had no screwdriver. There was no time for finesse. There was only time for action. He braced himself in the narrow duct, raised the heavy steel rod over his head, and with a guttural roar of pure paternal rage, he brought it down on the metal grate with all his strength. The sound of the steel rod striking the grate was a deafening gong that reverberated through the corridor. The 2 mercenaries flinched, their heads snapping up from their work. The nurse, who had been bracing for a blow, stared at the ceiling, her mouth agape. That single moment of surprise was all Keen had. He struck the grate again, putting his entire body weight behind the blow. One of the screw housings sheared off with a sharp crack. He roared, a sound of pure animal fury, and slammed the rod down a 3rd and 4th time. Metal screamed and twisted. With a final wrenching pull, the grate tore free from the ceiling and crashed to the linoleum floor below. Before it had even stopped spinning, Keen dropped through the opening. He landed in a crouch, absorbing the 10-foot fall with the practiced ease of a man whose body remembered things his mind had tried to forget. He rose, a specter of vengeance in a janitor's uniform, the steel rod held in a 2-handed grip like a weapon from a forgotten age. The mercenary with the Halligan bar was closer. He dropped the tool and reached for his sidearm, but Keen was already on him. He didn't swing the rod. He thrusted, driving the sharp, threaded end forward like a spear. It punched into the man's shoulder, right where his tactical vest offered no protection. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of agony, and stumbled back. The second mercenary was faster. He already had his pistol up and fired. The shot was deafening in the corridor. Keen felt a searing, white-hot pain slice across his ribs as the bullet grazed him. But he didn't stop. He spun, using his momentum to swing the heavy steel rod in a brutal, horizontal arc. It connected with the gunman's wrist with the sound of snapping bone. The pistol flew from nerveless fingers. The man staggered, and Keen reversed his grip on the rod, driving the butt end up under the man's jaw. His head snapped back, and he collapsed in a heap, unconscious before he hit the floor. The first man, clutching his ruined shoulder, tried to raise his own weapon with his good hand. Keen was on him in an instant, kicking the gun away and driving his knee into the man's chest, pinning him to the floor. He pressed the steel rod against the man's throat. "Where is Jarek?" Keen's voice was a low, menacing growl. The man just coughed, blood flecking his lips, his eyes wide with terror. Keen didn't have time for an interrogation. He saw the nurse, pale and trembling, huddled with 2 other hospital staff who had peeked out from a nearby room. "Get back. Call for help if the lines are open. Barricade your door," he ordered, his voice rough. The nurse just nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, and quickly herded her colleagues back into the safety of another room. Keen was already turning, his own pain a dull throb in the background of his roaring adrenaline. He faced the splintered, broken door of room 512. The cheerful giraffe painted on it seemed to be mocking him. He shoved it open. The scene inside was one of quiet, sterile order. Lily was in her bed, propped up slightly. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the door, her small face pale. An IV line snaked into her arm, and the ventilator beside her bed hissed with a soft, rhythmic puff, pushing air into her fragile lungs. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady. For now. The violence, the rage, the killer he had just been in the hallway, all of it melted away. He was just a father. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was a tiny, frightened whisper. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his bloody steel rod clattering to the floor. He sank to his knees beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. It was so warm, so alive. "I'm here, baby," he said, his own voice thick and unsteady. "I'm here." "It's okay. The bad men are gone." "There was yelling," she said, her eyes welling up with tears, "and a big bang." "I know, sweetheart. It was just some noisy neighbors. They're leaving now." He squeezed her hand gently, trying to pour all the love and reassurance he felt into that one small touch. "Everything is going to be okay. I promise." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the weight of what he was risking, of what he stood to lose, settled on him with crushing force. This was his whole world, right here in this bed. A sharp static crackle from the corridor broke the spell. It was the radio, lying beside one of the unconscious mercenaries. Jarek's voice filled the silence. There was no trace of the earlier amusement. It was flat, cold, and dripping with venom. "I see you've been busy, Keen. I should have known. You were always more animal than surgeon." Keen didn't move. He just kept holding his daughter's hand. "You've made this personal," Jarek continued. "You should have just laid down and died. But you had to fight back. You had to make a mess. Fine. You want to protect her so badly? Let's see you protect the whole ward." A cold dread, worse than anything he'd felt on the terrace, crept up Keen's spine. "What did you do, Jarek?" he whispered, though he knew the man couldn't hear him. "I'm initiating a system purge of the pediatric wing's life support functions," Jarek announced, his voice echoing out into the hallway. "Power, oxygen, ventilators, everything. I guess the hospital's backup generators are malfunctioning." A terrible tragedy. On cue, the lights in Lily's room flickered violently. The main screen of her ventilator went dark, switching to a small, amber-colored battery backup display. A new alarm began to sound, a high-pitched, urgent beep that signaled critical system failure. Across the hall, other alarms began to chime in, creating a terrifying chorus of electronic distress. "You have about 10 minutes of battery power, Keen," Jarek's voice said, laced with triumph. 10 minutes until this whole floor goes dark and silent. You saved your daughter from my men. Now save her from the machine that's keeping her alive. The clock is ticking. Again." The high-pitched wail of the ventilator alarm was the sound of a countdown to oblivion. 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The number glowed in amber on the small screen, a digital hourglass draining away his daughter's life. Around them, from the other rooms in the ward, a symphony of similar alarms rose, a chorus of technological panic. The young nurse, Chloe, burst back into the room, her face stark white. "It's the whole floor," she said, her professional calm shredded by the scale of the disaster. The central oxygen lines are dead. Every ventilator, every IV pump, every monitor is on battery backup. Oh God, the babies in the NICU. Some of their batteries will only last 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The thought was a physical blow. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. Jarek was going to execute an entire floor of sick children as a footnote in his revenge. Keene looked at his daughter, so small in her bed, and then at the nurse. "I'm going to fix this," Keene said, his voice hard as stone. He needed a destination. "The central controls for this wing's power and life support." "Where are they?" "The sub-level," Chloe answered immediately. "There's a primary control room down there, but it's on the south side of the building, and Jarek's men, they'll be everywhere." Keene knew. He couldn't fight his way through a dozen men and get there in time. He needed help. He needed chaos. He grabbed the radio from the floor, his mind locking onto his only ally in this fight. He keyed the mic. "Rowan, do you copy? Graves, come in." He was met with static. He tried again, his voice raw with urgency. "Rowan, it's Keene. Respond if you can hear me." On the terrace, huddled behind their flimsy barricade, Rowan and the others had been listening to the distant gunshots, followed by a terrifying silence. Then the new alarms started, a faint but pervasive chorus of electronic distress from within the hospital. They didn't know what it meant, only that it was bad. Then Keene's voice crackled through the radio, clipped to Graves's vest, strained and desperate. Rowan grabbed it. "Keene, we're here. What's happening? What is that sound?" "Jarek," Keene's voice shot back, rapid fire, each word a hammer blow. "He's cut the life support to the entire pediatric wing. Oxygen power, everything. The ventilators are on battery. I have less than 10 minutes to get it back online, or children will die. Lily will die." The horror of the statement silenced them. This was a new level of monstrousness. "What do you need?" Rowan asked, his mind already shifting from defense to offense. "I have to get to the sub-level control room," Keene said, "but Jarek will have men everywhere. I need a diversion. Something big, something loud, something that will pull every man he has in the opposite direction for at least 5 minutes." Rowan looked around the terrace. He saw the broken gas lines for the decorative heating lamps, the flammable cushions on the iron benches, the oxygen canister from a portable medical kit that had been brought out. He saw the wind whipping around the corner of the building. He saw a solution, a terrible, dangerous, and perfect solution. "I have an idea," Rowan said into the radio, his voice grim. "It's crazy, but it might work. We're going to start a fire." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then, "A fire!" "The building's fire suppression system," Rowan explained, his CEO mind seeing the system dynamics. "It's a separate, hardwired protocol. If the heat sensors on this terrace are triggered, it will sound a building-wide alarm. It will activate sprinklers, override lockdown doors to create evacuation routes. It will create chaos. Jarek's system control will be fighting the building's primary safety protocols. He'll have to send men to deal with the source of the fire. It's the biggest diversion I can think of." "It's also suicide," Graves cut in, his face pale. "We're trapped out here with it." "He's right," Keene's voice crackled. "You'll be roasted." "The sprinklers will activate here too," Rowan countered. "And the corner of the building will shield us from the worst of the heat if we set it up right. It's a risk. But you're out of time. Are there any better ideas?" There weren't. It was a mad gamble, a desperate play in a game where all the pieces were already lost. "Do it," Keene said finally. The words were heavy with the weight of what he was asking. "Do it. I'm moving now. I'm heading for the south stairwell." "Good luck, you too," Rowan replied. Then the line went dead. Keene turned to Nurse Chloe. The alarms were a constant, piercing wail. The ventilator battery read 814. "If that battery dies, you manually bag her. You don't stop. You don't leave this room. Do you understand me?" She saw the raw, terrifying plea in his eyes, the promise of a father who would tear the world down for his child. She nodded, her fear replaced by a sudden, fierce resolve. "I understand. I won't leave her, thank you," Keene said, the words inadequate. He picked up the steel rod and the pistol he'd taken from one of the downed men. He gave his daughter one last, heartbreaking look, then slipped out of the room. The corridor was a nightmare symphony of wailing alarms. Nurses and a few doctors were running, moving from room to room, their faces etched with panic. Keene moved quickly, sticking to the walls, a ghost of purpose amidst the chaos. He had to get from the north side of the wing to the south, where the emergency stairwell led down to the sublevels. On the terrace, Rowan worked with a feverish intensity he hadn't felt since his first startup. "Graves, break the gas lines on those heaters. Celeste, help me with these cushions. Pile them up right here." They dragged the flammable cushions and broken pieces of furniture into a heap near the center of the terrace. Graves used the butt of his pistol to smash the valves and pipes of the decorative heating lamps, and the distinct smell of natural gas began to hiss into the air. "Everyone back to the corner," Rowan yelled, pulling a lighter from his pocket, a habit he'd never managed to kick from his stressful younger days. He stood before the pile of debris, the wind whipping his hair. He thought of the children, their lives measured in the blinking lights of dying machines. He thought of Alara, his Alara, huddled with her mother, watching him with wide, trusting eyes. He flicked the lighter. A small, determined flame sprang to life, dancing in the wind. He took one last look at his family, then tossed it onto the pile. The lighter seemed to fall in slow motion. The moment it hit the gas-soaked pile, the world ignited. A furious whoomph erupted from the terrace, a blossoming fireball that greedily sucked the air around it and roared toward the sky. The heat was instantaneous and immense, a physical wave that slammed into Rowan and the others even as they huddled around the corner. The glass on the upper floors of the wing shattered from the thermal shock, raining down onto the streets below. Immediately, the building itself seemed to scream. The piercing shriek of a new, louder fire alarm blotted out the medical alarms. Red emergency lights began to flash, painting the corridors in strobing, apocalyptic pulses. A second later, the hiss of the fire suppression system started, and the water began to rain down from the ceiling sprinklers, both inside and out on the terrace. The chaos Rowan had promised was unleashed. Jarek's voice exploded over the mercenary comms network, now filled with the shriek of the fire alarm. "What the hell was that?" "I have a fire alarm on the 5th floor terrace. West Perimeter team report. What is happening?" On the terrace, Rowan and the others were being drenched, the water doing little to combat the raging chemical fire, but keeping them from being cooked alive. Graves peered over their barricade, pistol ready. "It's working," Rowan gasped, shielding Alara with his body. "Fire on the terrace!" a panicked voice shouted over the comms. "The assets are out here. They started a fire. Contain them!" Jarek roared. "I want all North Wing units to converge on the 5th floor terrace. Box them in. Kill the fire. Kill them if you have to. I want this situation handled now." The diversion was working better than they could have hoped. Jarek, arrogant and in control moments before, was now reacting, his forces being pulled toward the chaos like moths to a flame. Keene used the pandemonium to his advantage. He broke into a dead sprint down the main corridor, a ghost moving through the flashing red lights and the mist of the sprinklers. The wail of the fire alarm was a cover for the sound of his footsteps. He rounded a corner just as a 3-man team of Jarek's mercenaries ran past, heading in the opposite direction toward the terrace. They were focused on their new objective, their faces grim. In the strobing chaos, they didn't even see the janitor slip past them. He reached the south stairwell door. As Rowan had predicted, the fire alarm had overridden Jarek's lockdown on the emergency exits. The magnetic lock was disengaged. Keene plunged through it into the relative quiet of the concrete stairwell. He half ran, half fell down the stairs, the flashing emergency lights making the descent a dizzying, disorienting nightmare. He risked a glance at his watch. The cheap plastic was fogged with water. He wiped it clear. 4 minutes left. He burst out onto the sublevel. The air was cool and dry here, the alarms more distant. This was the hospital's basement, a labyrinth of massive pipes, humming electrical conduits, and hulking transformers. It smelled of concrete and ozone. He moved through the maze, following the overhead signs he'd only ever glanced at before. Electrical, plumbing, HVC. Then he saw it, a reinforced metal door at the end of a narrow corridor labeled Wing C, Life Support and Power Distribution. His hope died the moment he saw the figure standing in front of it. A man, even larger than the others, stood with his arms crossed, a shotgun held loosely in one hand. He wasn't wearing a mask. He had a shaved head and a jagged scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He had clearly been waiting, a sentinel at the heart of Jarek's stolen kingdom. Jarek was a good tactician. He would never leave his nerve center completely unguarded. The man saw Keen, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He didn't raise the shotgun immediately. He just watched Keen approach, as if he had all the time in the world. "Jarek said you might come," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "He said you were dangerous. You don't look so tough. You look tired. You're bleeding." Keen slowed, his pistol held at the ready, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain in his side was a constant, grinding agony. His muscles screamed with exhaustion. The man was right. He was tired. He was hurt. And his time was running out. He checked his watch again. 3 minutes. "Get out of the way," Keen said, his voice barely a whisper. The big man laughed, a harsh grating sound. "My orders are to hold this door, and I always follow my orders." He finally raised the shotgun, the sound of him racking a shell into the chamber, echoing like a death sentence in the concrete hallway. In the narrow confines of the corridor, the shotgun was the superior weapon. They both knew it. "This is as far as you go." The big man's smile was the last thing Keen wanted to see. It was the casual cruelty of a predator who knew the fight was already over. The narrow corridor was a perfect kill box for a shotgun. At this range, one blast would cut him in half. A pistol was useless. 2 minutes, hero," the man rumbled, enjoying himself. "What's it going to be? Are you going to try something stupid, or are you just going to stand there and listen to the flatline?" Keen's eyes weren't on the man's face. They were scanning the environment, his mind working with a desperate, feverish clarity. The pain in his side was a hot iron, his breath a ragged saw in his chest. He couldn't win with force. He had nothing left. He had to change the equation. His gaze swept past electrical conduits and water pipes, and then locked onto it. A large, heavily lagged pipe running along the ceiling with a bright red warning stencil repeated every few feet. Danger. High-pressure steam. The building's sterilization system. A vein of pure, explosive energy. He saw a junction valve about 10 feet behind the guard. A weak point. An insane idea. His only chance. 90 seconds, the guard taunted. Keen knew he'd only get one shot. He had to create an opportunity. He let his shoulders slump, the pistol in his hand seeming too heavy for him. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound, and let his whole body tremble. "It's over," Keen rasped, his voice a broken whisper. "You win." He let the pistol slip from his grasp, letting it clatter to the concrete floor. He slid down the wall, collapsing into a sitting position, his head bowed in defeat. The guard's smile widened. The janitor was broken. Overconfidence was a fatal flaw. "I told you," the big man said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, savoring the moment. "This is as far as you go." He took another step, bringing him right under the pipe junction. Keen's hand, hidden from view, had already pulled the second pistol, the one he'd taken from Graves, from the back of his waistband. As the guard looked down on him with contempt, Keen moved. It wasn't a sudden leap. It was a fluid, economical roll onto his side. The pistol was up and aimed in less than a second. He didn't aim at the man. He aimed at the valve behind him. He fired twice. The bullet slammed into the brass housing of the high-pressure valve. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the world became a screaming white hell. The valve exploded with the force of a bomb. A jet of superheated steam erupted with a sound that was beyond hearing, a physical concussion that shook the building. The guard was thrown forward as if hit by a truck, a scream instantly silenced by the roar. Keene had shielded himself behind a concrete support pillar, but the blast still washed over him, searing his exposed skin. Then, it was over. The initial blast subsided, replaced by the steady, deafening hiss of steam filling the corridor with a thick, blinding fog. Keene pushed himself up, his body screaming, and stumbled forward through the hot, wet mist. The guard was an unmoving shape on the floor. He reached the door. The electronic keypad was a flickering, melted ruin. He looked at his watch. The screen was cracked. 50 seconds. He didn't have time to be delicate. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the damaged keypad. Plastic shattered. He did it again, and the housing fell away, revealing a mess of wires. He holstered the pistol, his burned fingers grabbing two specific wires, a blue one and a red one. He ripped them free and touched the exposed ends together. A shower of sparks. The lock on the door gave a loud clunk and disengaged. He threw his shoulder against the heavy door and stumbled into the control room. It was quiet. A wall of monitors faced him, most dark, one showing a schematic of the pediatric wing flashing red. He saw the main console, a glass-covered panel labeled Wing C, Emergency Life Support Override. He smashed the glass with his elbow and reached for the single, heavy-duty breaker switch. It was in the off position. His watch read 10 seconds. His hand, shaking and burned, closed around the cool plastic. 9, 8, 7. He pulled down with the last ounce of his strength. The heavy switch slammed home with a deep, resonant thunk. A moment of silence. Then, a low hum began to build. A series of loud clicks echoed as relays reset. On the main monitor, the power graph for the pediatric wing instantly spiked from 0 to 100%. The red warnings turned a steady, reassuring green. He heard it then, faintly, over the hissing steam from the hallway. The chorus of alarms from the floor above had stopped. He had done it. The relief was so absolute, so total, that his body, held together by nothing but will, finally gave out. He collapsed, unconscious, as the sounds of approaching tactical boots echoed from the stairwell. 2 weeks later, sunlight streamed into the hospital room. Lily was propped up in her bed, a drawing pad on her lap, looking brighter than Keene had seen her in a year. In a wheelchair beside her sat Keene himself, his arm in a sling, his side heavily bandaged, and angry red burn marks on his hands and neck. He was pale and weak, but he was smiling as he watched his daughter draw. The door opened and the Beaumont family entered. Rowan, Celeste, and a smiling Ilara, who clutched a drawing of her own. The awkwardness of their first meeting was a distant memory, replaced by a comfortable, easy warmth. "We brought you something," Ilara said, holding out her drawing to Lily. It was a picture of two families, standing under a smiling sun. While the girls compared their artwork, Rowan stood beside Keene's wheelchair. "It's over," Rowan said quietly. "The man who hired Jarek was arrested this morning. Your testimony, the comms data, it buried him. They've classified your records. As far as the world is concerned, Keene O'Connell is just a janitor who became a hero." Keene nodded, a profound weight lifting from his shoulders. "I came here to offer you a job," Rowan continued, his voice serious. "But that's not right. I came to offer you a new start. My family's foundation is creating a new division, a global disaster response unit. We need someone to build it, someone who knows how to run into a fire, not away from it, someone who can make the hard calls when everything has gone wrong." He met Keene's eyes. "The position comes with a full relocation package, top-tier medical coverage for you and Lily, for life. A clean slate, a chance to use who you are, all of who you are, to save people." Keen looked at his daughter, who was now laughing with her new friend. He thought of the shadows he had lived in for so long. He had tried to bury the surgeon, but it was that part of him that had saved the one person who mattered most. Maybe it was time to stop running. He could never erase what he had done, but from now on, he could choose what he did next. He could be a healer, a protector, a hero. "I'd like that," Keen said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in a very long time. "I think Lily would like a new adventure." It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A story not of a janitor who was once a killer, but of a father who would do anything to protect his child, and in doing so, finally found a way to save himself. If you're hearing this, it means you stayed to the very end. Thank you. That honestly means the world to me. I really hope you got something out of it. Maybe a new way of looking at things, a moment of peace, or just a good escape from the everyday. If you did, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. You see, we're on a mission here, to prove that deep, meaningful stories still have a place in this world. When you subscribe, it's like you're telling us, keep going. When you hit that like button, you're giving the story a little push so it can find the next person who might need it. Don't forget those notifications so you know when the next one is ready. From me to you, thank you for being here. Carry the best parts of this one with you.